I would ask people to raise their hands if they were here to make a difference, if they were here to make an impact, if they wanted to create a dent in the universe. And every single hand in most of these rooms would go straight up in the air. Tall, straight, strong, adamant. I am here to make a difference. I am here to make an impact. And then I would ask people to keep their hands up if they loved sales. And almost every single hand in every single room would go down. But here's the truth. If you're here to make a difference, if you're here to make an impact, you have to actually have cash. You have to have cash. You can only get cash if you know how to sell, and sales is your oxygen. Welcome back to the Speaker Driven Business Podcast, where I want to have a very frank and open conversation with you. And that is, we actually have to all fall in love with sales and negotiating, because the simple truth, to build a sustainable, predictable, speaking driven business, you are going to have to fall in love with sales, because sales is your oxygen. When I was first actually starting out, the first iteration of this business, I was speaking in a lot of networking rooms. This is pre-COVID, when actually turning up and speaking networking rooms was probably our primary channel to market. And in every one of these rooms, I would ask people to raise their hands if they were here to make a difference, if they were here to make an impact, if they wanted to create a dent in the universe. And every single hand in most of these rooms would go straight up in the air. Tall, straight, strong, adamant. I am here to make a difference. I am here to make an impact. And then I would ask people to keep their hands up if they loved sales. And almost every single hand in every single room would go down. But here's the truth. If you're here to make a difference, if you're here to make an impact, you have to actually have cash. You have to have cash. You can only get cash if you know how to sell, and sales is your oxygen. Even if you are creating a movement or a charity or a not-for-profit or a social enterprise, you still have to know how to sell. Selling is actually the art of persuasion and influence, the art of moving people closer to a decision to engage in a vision of the world that is possible through working with you or partnering with you, to enroll them in an alternate view of the world. Sales is critical to your future success. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to break down the one thing that can turn your speaking business into something sustainable and predictable, and that's the sales calls. This is super important. Everyone comes into this business because they want to inspire, motivate, or create change. And even if you're not looking to be a speaker, I know in rooms of entrepreneurs, we are driven by the same thing. But here's the truth. Sales, as I said, is your oxygen. You actually need it to fuel your career, to grow, to scale, to actually get your message heard. But there's one big roadblock. Nearly every single one of you are shying away from it. What has really, really amazed me recently is that it doesn't matter the level you're playing at. Sales has become the thing that is most intrinsically resisted. Now, when it comes to speaking, most emerging speakers particularly will shy away from sales and negotiating, thinking it's uncomfortable, that's not aligned with their calling. Many women speakers, female speakers will tell me it's too masculine, but we need to flip our thinking on this. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll understand why I'm so adamant about this. I want you to understand why falling in love with sales and negotiating is not only necessary, but it's also the key to achieving the impact you want to make as a speaker, as an expert. I'm going to show you how to reframe sales so that it feels like an extension of your purpose, not something separate from it. Now, some of you in my world would have seen previous headlines about, personally driving $35 million in sales in my career and being responsible for driving tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars more. But my simple thing that you don't know about me, my simple truth that you don't know about me, is that I am not a natural salesperson. At the very start of my career, I bumped around. I did bar work and I worked at McDonald's. I did all of that sort of stuff right through until my mid-20s. Now, from my early 20s on, I started getting a little bit on a more straight and narrow pathway, if you like, and I started as reception in administration. By my mid-20s, I was actually an executive assistant and I was working for an incredible recruitment company at the time. In Australia, Morgan & Banks at the time was the dominant player and the elite in its field. Now, I was very happily in there as an executive assistant. really happy to support others, making big waves, I guess, and making the big money. I loved my job. There was no two ways about it. But I became a single mother to my eldest son, and I realized that a secretary's wage was not going to cut it. And I, therefore, did my first really successful pitch without even realizing it. What I did was I actually went to get a consulting role because I knew consultants earned a lot more money than executive assistants. Now, that pitch took a little bit to get across the line, but eventually I had the regional manager come and sit at my desk one day and say, "Are you serious about this?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Great, that's your desk over there. You start in the accounting team on Monday." I was so excited because that promotion was usually at least 3 levels that you had to move through over a period of at least 2 years. So I was being backed. It wasn't just about backing myself. I was being backed by the regional management team. And I picked up my things and I moved over to that desk. And on that Monday, I started. And the thing I hadn't realized was the reason the consultants make money is because they're salespeople. They know how to sell. They know how to drive growth. They are salespeople. You have to learn how to sell. So for the first 6 months of that job, I kid you not, I went home exhausted every day and I cried every night because the concept of actually selling and having to sell every day was so foreign to me that it felt as though it was tearing apart my soul. And the only reason why I stayed with it and saw it through was because the only way that I could actually have any hope of providing a lifestyle for my son that I envisioned I would want to do was to actually understand this skill, was to become proficient at it. I had no desire to become masterful at it. I just wanted to be proficient enough to make some more money. And that's why I stuck it out. Now, I was really fortunate. For those of you not aware and not in the Australian market, I was working at a company called Morgan & Banks, as I mentioned. Andrew Banks, one of the co-founders, went on to become one of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time, is an investor on Shark Tank, and actually grew this business with his co-founder, Jeff Morgan, to unprecedented heights that I don't think have been matched since. So in that process, I not only was taught to sell, I was taught to sell by the best in the business. And the teams and the structure and the training and the coaching and the accountability were second to none. What I see nearly every single day in my work now is that everybody feels like they can bypass sales. They can resist sales. People have really patchy, lumpy pipelines because of the fact that they actually aren't learning to sell at all. What they're doing is they're brilliant order takers. Now, what do I mean by this? It's a key distinction that I want you to understand, because an order taker can convert business coming their way where the buying decision's already been made. And that happens more and more in this environment. Absolutely. There are so many points of contact across our content that sometimes the buyer has already decided that you are the only alternative and they come ready to buy. That's not sales. That's taking an order. That's order taking. In order to be great at sales, you need to, number one, not resist it. And number two, you need to actually learn the craft of it. It is a process that anybody can learn. Because if you don't, you're going to continue bouncing around and being knocked around by the tides and the ebb and flow of a lumpy pipeline. And that's not what I want. Now, what has surprised me is every single client coming into my world, from $0 startup through to multiple 6 figures, through to actually multi-million-dollar turnover, are not nailing their sales. It is literally, if it comes my way, great. And then a whole big frustration point around why they're not getting more. So it's not a levels issue. It's not a level of experience issue. It is an everyone issue. And I want to really unpack that. But why should we really care about this? Well, number one, I personally absolutely vehemently believe that I would not be standing today if I'd not learned how to sell, if I'd not learned the skill of persuasion. But to back it up a little bit more, a study from McKinsey found that professionals who view sales as a way to help people solve problems, which is what all of you tell me you do. You are here to change the world. You are here to solve problems, and you are here to add value. So those professionals who view sales as a way to help people solve problems rather than as a pushy process are 65% more successful at closing deals. I want you just to pull up for a moment and just think back over the inquiries and the deals and the possible deals that you've had and the deals that you've closed. If you had 65% more revenue and more success at closing deals without generating a single more lead from a quantity perspective, how much of a difference would that make? So if you've only sold $10,000 in fees in the last 12 months, you're suddenly at 16.5. If you've sold $50,000 worth of fees in the last 12 months, you're suddenly at 86.5. It's insane how quickly this goes up. Sales is not about pushing your product or your service. It's about aligning your value with someone else's need. This reframe can help you fall in love with sales because it's just another form of service. And the moment that I understood this was the moment that everything changed for me 27 years ago when I first went into my first sales role. This is what made the difference. The other thing is I want you to understand is that negotiation, the skill of negotiation is non-negotiable. According to Harvard Law School, 90% of business leaders believe that negotiation skills are essential to long-term success. For speakers and experts, this means that you actually can't just be good on stage. You have to know how to advocate for yourself, to negotiate your worth and position your value. And for the female speakers and experts that are following along with this podcast series, you have to double down on this, right? So then why do we really need to fall in love with sales and negotiation? That's some of the research out there, and that's only scratching the iceberg. If you go looking for the research, it is everywhere, and it's inarguable that these two skills of sales and negotiation are essential to your future. So let's talk into some of the reasons why I believe you need to fall in love with sales and negotiation as a speaker. And the first one is that sales is actually your path to impact. If you tell me, like those rooms that I spoke about at the start, that your goal is to inspire, to create change and move people to action, you need to be in rooms where your message can be heard by the people who need to hear it. And the only way to get into those rooms consistently is by selling yourself. Sales puts you in front of the people and the audience who need your message the most. It's actually not about the revenue. It's about reach and impact, where revenue is the outcome, right? So I want you to think about that. The second thing is sales is actually how you build relationships. And this probably seems really bizarre, but at the core, sales is all about building connection. It's not just about pitching. It's about understanding the needs of someone, about showing them how you can help, about demonstrating that you understand their pain. When you approach sales as a conversation and not a transaction, it becomes easier to fall in love with the process. You are building relationships, and relationships are the foundation of a long-lasting speaking career. Now, some of the more established speakers in Australia, they're 15, 20, and 25 years into their career, and 70 to 80% of their business is repeat. Do not underestimate the power of using the sales process to establish connection and be the start of building a relationship. It is really, really important. Sales is a conversation first. It is a place of common curiosity, and this is what creates the relationship element. And the third thing I want you to understand is that negotiation is not something to be resisted. Negotiation is all about how much you value yourself. It's about self-worth. So every time you negotiate, you're actually drawing a line in the sand. You are saying, this is the value of my time, my expertise, and my message. So many speakers, especially emerging speakers, leave money on the table because they're afraid to negotiate or feel it's inappropriate. I love here the quote by Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference. And if you're not aware of that book, I suggest you pull up now and you make sure you go and get it. But Never Split the Difference. Chris Voss has a quote that said, you don't have to like negotiation, but you do have to master it. Because if you don't negotiate, if you actually just let things slide to where the client wants it to go, you actually devalue yourself, you devalue your message, and you actually start to really give fuel to the fire of the imposter syndrome because you actually never get into the places you want to be. Falling in love with negotiation means falling in love with advocating for the value you bring to the room. The other thing is that sales actually brings your message alive. We want your message to reach more people, which means you need to be selling regularly, which we've already talked about. But you need to actually also make sure that you do understand it, because what I see all the time is there's almost like a honeymoon period, right? Where people go out to speak, and even if they're actually being paid what they're worth right from the start, there's like this steady growth and then a peak of activity where there's lots of gigs, there's great revenue, everything's working really well, but then it falls off. And it's almost predictable. And the reason why it's almost predictable is because people are not investing their ability to sell. So no matter how good you are as a speaker, if you don't invest in this ability to sell and to close a deal, then all that's going to happen is you are going to actually, sorry, can you just do an edit? All that's going to happen is you're actually going to have a declining business. You are going to go into what we call confused exhaustion, and you'll eventually end up in oblivion. Because if you don't understand the sales process, you can't actually pick your pipeline back up. And this is what I see all the time. Great activity, a peak period, and then a steady decline. So I want to reframe some things, and this is based on conversations that I have with people almost every single day. And the first thing is that sales is not sleazy. One of the biggest myths we have about sales is that it's pushy, it's manipulative, it's 1980s NLP, it's a used car salesman. But the truth is, when done right, sales is about helping someone solve a problem or meet a need. When you approach sales with integrity and alignment, it becomes a natural part of what you do. You're simply matching your expertise to their needs. And here's the thing that I have loved about all of the organizations and the teams and the individuals that I've taught sales to. Sales, mastering sales, actually gives you complete control. And what I mean by this is you learn faster who and what to say no to. One of the major sales trainings that I did across the country for Tattersalls training, one of the biggest activities that we did on the way to quadrupling the conversion rate was actually identifying the idiots. And the session was called Stop Working with Idiots. And we actually identified who it is that we don't like to work with, who becomes our bad customers and clients once they're on board. And we shaped questions and conversations in the sales process that was actually able to literally identify them early in the process. And because of that, we're able to move out people who are not suitable, who are not a fit, not a match earlier in the process. And that is good for everyone involved. So actually understanding how to sell actually gives you complete control. The second thing is that negotiation is not conflict. I think so much of the time we actually push back and resist negotiation because we link it to conflict mentally. We see it as a confrontation, but negotiation is actually about collaboration. It's about a conversation, about a dialogue to make sure all parties feel good about the outcome. When you reframe negotiation as an opportunity for mutual benefit, for understanding what each of us need, it becomes something you look forward to, not something you dread. The other thing is that sales is a mindset shift. I think we've actually talked about this enough in this podcast, but just to bring it home again, falling in love with sales requires a mindset shift from seeing it as something you have to do to something you get to do. Every time you sell or negotiate, you're creating opportunities to share your message, to make an impact and grow your business. And I don't think there could be anything better. But if you're still in doubt, let's talk about some of the mistakes that emerging speakers particularly make with sales and negotiation. Although I shouldn't say emerging speakers. We had somebody recently reach out to us after listening to a podcast and say to us, I just listened to your 7 sales mistakes that speakers made. I'm experienced. I've grown big businesses. I'm an entrepreneur. I have global organizations under my belt. And I realized that I was still making mistakes. So this is not just about the emerging. This may be a very good refresher for those of you who are more experienced. Number 1 is underestimating your value. Too many accept lower fees or undersell themselves. And this is speaking, workshops, training, facilitation, consulting, coaching, because they don't feel confident negotiating. You're actually setting a price where you know you won't have to negotiate. You fear that asking for more will lose your gig, so you settle for less than what you're worth. Now, you need to actually fix this because you need to create a baseline and stop feeling pressure to undervalue yourself. The second thing is we avoid the sales process altogether. Now, I'm experienced in sales now. I've got some great track records and I will still push back on the sales process when I'm not having such a great day. So we avoid the process altogether. But what I'm seeing more and more is that most people are relying on their ability to deliver an outstanding talk. And don't get me wrong, delivering an outstanding talk, hitting our gold zone, that's absolutely critical to being able to generate business. But it doesn't automatically generate more bookings. You actually have to be able to sell. Now, if you are resistant to the sales call, you'll be resistant to the reach out, you'll be resistant to the follow-up, you'll be resistant to every part of the process, and you'll end up avoiding it. Relying on your stage presence alone does not create a predictable pipeline, and it's no way to build a predictable business. You're also in fear of the word no. Many of us are in service and value adding, and we want to know that we're giving and we're valued and appreciated for what we bring into the world. But most of us are actually avoiding sales because we're afraid of hearing no. Now, I was really fortunate at the start of my career. We were told that there was no valuable or viable data until we made 100 sales calls. When we made 100 sales calls, then we could evaluate the data. And we were taught that every no was closer to a yes, because on the law of averages, with 100 sales calls, you picked up 7 jobs in the particular industry that we were in. So we were very much of the mindset and the attitude of celebrating the no's, because every no was closer to the next yes. But as speakers, we tend to take the no personally. And it discourages us from pursuing opportunities. It discourages us from reaching out to people. So what I would suggest is you get very good at asking questions and going into sales calls as conversations and places, as I said, where curiosity meets. So for example, get good at questions. Can you tell me more about what you're hesitating? What would need to change for this to feel like a fit? Are you okay if I share with you what I've seen before? Everything that we do in the sales process should actually look at uncovering and unlocking information and shifting us deeper and deeper into conversation with a very deliberate outcome to getting a yes or a no, because sometimes we have to force a no.